Today we're going to make 4 seam samples. The first 2 seams that we'll make are plain seams and double stitch seams. In the second video, we will make a French seam and a flat felt seam. You have notes on seams, and the first 2 that we're going to make are on the first page. For each of your seams, you need to cut 2 pieces of muslin 4 inches by 8 inches, so that's a total of 8 pieces. Seams lengthen the life of your garment and help retain the shape of your garment. I'm using black thread so that you can see what I'm sewing, but usually we match the thread to the fabric. A flat seam, or plain seam, is flat, uniform width, 5/8 of an inch, standard seam allowance, smooth without puckers, true in line, standard stitch size, 2.5 or 9 to 12 inches stitches per inch, with no tangled or broken threads. With your right sides together, although with muslin it doesn't really matter, and I've got 2 pins in here. I'm going to line up on the 5/8 inch line. I'm going to put my needle in, my presser foot down, and I'm going to back stitch about 1/2 inch. Make sure my threads are there. Back stitch. And as I get to my pins, I will take them out. And I'm watching right along the 5/8 inch marking because the needle and fabric aren't going to move. So that's where I want to line it up. Take my next pin out. And as I get to the end, I'll slow down and then take a back stitch. Make sure your take-up lever is in the highest position. If it doesn't stop that way, pull out your threads, clip your threads, and there's your 5/8 inch seam, and there's a back stitch beginning and end. Usually at this point we would press it flat the way we sewed it, and then press it open, like so. But for today, for your sample, what I would like you to do is to send me a picture of your seam so I can see your back stitch beginning and end, a nice straight line that's 5/8 of an inch long. So that's how you will submit that sample. The second seam that we want to do is a double stitch seam. And this is a seam that's used frequently for knits. A double stitch seam right there, 2 lines of stitching. You start the same way, your 2 pieces of muslin pinned together, and the first thing you're going to do is stitch a plain seam, which means line it up at 5/8, needle in, press your foot down, and do your back stitch again, and come straight forward. To the end and back stitch again. Pull your fabric out, trim your threads, and you have to do a second line of stitching 1/8 of an inch from the first row. Now, if this was at 5/8, the next line will be lined up at 4/8. So I'm going to line it up, put my needle in, press her foot down, back stitch, and come straight down. And I'm watching right along here where my mark for 4/8 of an inch is. Once again, when you get to the end, back stitch and stop. Pull your fabric out. And there's your 2 lines of stitching. Okay, one's at 5/8, one's at 4/8. Then what you want to do is trim your seam allowance close to the second row of stitching. So you can just take your shears and trim this down, like so, close to the second row of stitching. So you'll complete that, you'll complete trimming that, okay? And when you're finished, this is what it will look like. 2 rows of stitching, 1/8 of an inch apart, and the edges are trimmed, and that's a double stitched seam. Back stitch beginning and end. And those are the plain seams that we're going to be sewing on this video. The next video we'll take a look at a French seam and a flat felled seam.